Anime is known for a lot many things. Amazing fight scenes, some of the most beautiful animation sequences ever, top-tier voice acting that even gives Hollywood a run for their money, and slavery. Yeah, no, seriously, slavery is a pretty huge plot point in a lot of anime. Some of the biggest anime that you've watched probably have some kind of slavery in it. And before you think it's some random throwaway story beat, there's actually so much of slavery in anime and manga that people straight up thought that Japan had a low-key fictional slavery kink. And the thing is, they're not wrong. Sort of. Because while Japan doesn't celebrate slavery, they kinda use the idea of slavery to escape their terrible work-life balance and notoriously lethal work culture. So what's the deal, right? Why is slavery so prevalent in anime? And why do they never solve it when they do have it? And why is that slave girl that's liberated by the MC always learn to love slavery? And the answer is a lot more complicated than you think. But before that, let me talk about the sponsor for today's video, Jpfans. Do you like Thing from Japan? Do you dream of going through a Japanese man's used items and finding gold? Then Jpfans is the perfect platform for you. It's an online shopping platform where you can get authentic Japanese goods directly from Japan. But I like to think of Jpfans more like an online Japanese thrift store. You will find some absolute gems on this website, and let me show you some of the gems that I bought from Jpfans. One of them being this cool-ass wind chime. As a certified SEA man who lives in a country where the sun hates him, I just thought, hey, if I'm gonna have to suffer in this hell called Malaysia, I might as well make it aesthetic. I also got this Kitagawa Marin figurine, which, I'ma be honest, I just bought because I wanted some degenerate weeb shit. There is literally no deeper meaning to this purchase. I may criticize the gooners, but I'm not above them sometimes. So if you also want the euphoric high of going through a Japanese thrift store and coming out with the most random assorted shit, use my codes when signing up for Jpfans and save some money on your first few orders. Thanks again to Jpfans for sponsoring this video.
Today's subject is slavery and freedom.
So you might be thinking, there is no way that slavery is so common in fantasy anime. And my guy, you'd be surprised. You got the male MC being a slave, the female MC being a slave. You got child soldier slaves. You got slave harems. You got slave harems of child soldier slaves. And slavery in a moderated online game. Somehow. And I know the common answer a lot of people are gonna say in the comments is that it's for the power fantasy, dummy, it's not that deep. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It is absolutely for the power fantasy. At least in the dime dozen power fantasy isekais. Having a main character free the slave girl is an easy way to farm aura and a love interest. As Fatuma Muhammad says in her thesis paper, quote, isekai mediates this rapid growth of its young heroes through fantastical worlds, in which young Japanese men find their ostensibly immature hobbies validated, free of any pressure to conform. They are allowed to prove themselves on a stage where the rules make sense to them, and where they find the validation, fulfillment, success, and companionship that they could not at home. Which is a long-ass way to say that escapism is the point of the genre. And in a weird way, slavery is included in that escapism. Because you see, slavery as a trope is kind of a cheat. It's a really easy way to get the things rolling for the main character. You want a female love interest that's devoted to the MC? Have her be a liberated slave girl who's so madly in love with him. Have her say some weird shit, like how she doesn't mind being the MC's slave because he's so kind. You need a starting base for the main character so that he has easy access to some resources? Have the main character liberate some oppressed beast people that don't mind working for him for free. Yeah, he doesn't pay us in the centralized currency of the kingdom that could potentially give us financial freedom, but he doesn't beat us though. But because slavery is meant to serve the main character, it rarely gets resolved. On the better end, you do get anime where the characters maybe take down a slaver or two, but most of the time, especially in power fantasy anime, a lot of main characters are apathetic to the idea of slavery. They're always reluctant to get involved in the affairs of the world, and when they do need to intervene, they only do so when it starts to jeopardize someone close to them and affects them personally. Now, I'm not saying that I need a John Brown anime where I get to see the main character bring fire and fury to slaver scum, though admittedly that would be cool. I'm just saying that it's very rare for the main characters to ever push for the abolition of such a system. The trope is meant to be a moral implication of how shitty the world they've been transported to is, but at the same time, a convenient plot point. A really good example of this is in the anime Rising of a Shield Hero. Yes, I'm bringing up this dead horse. In the anime, the main character Naofumi directly indulges in slavery after having been betrayed by his supposedly early friends. Gets betrayed, shamed, humiliated, and ultimately run out of the kingdom he was supposed to protect. And the entire anime is all about him clawing his way back up to success and getting revenge on the people that wronged him. And partly to do that, he goes out to build his own party that's loyal to him. You know, some blackjack and hookers type shit. Except the hookers in this case is him getting a slave from a slave driver who he continuously hangs out with throughout the multiple seasons of the show. And there is a really funny implication in him doing this. Because for now, Fumi, who in the story is established to be an average Japanese college student, who at the same time we have to assume has the ethics and morals of a 21st century person, actively travels with a slave driver. And yeah, I know the entire point of the early story is that he's supposed to be morally gray and that he's so traumatized by betrayal that he's not afraid to get his hands dirty. But it's just a really funny implication to think about every time this bald git appears on screen. Because he doesn't go away. He becomes a series regular bordering on comic relief. This is a dude that actively trades in flesh, becomes one of the quintessential Isekai 3. Ah yes, the iconic three-man Isekai trio. The overpowered MC, the obsessed and utterly devoted female co-lead to the overpowered MC, the merch mascot, and the slave driver. And what makes the implication more funny is that both in the anime and in the original light novel, the story really wants you to know that this guy isn't like other slave traders. Other merchants of flesh, they beat their slaves, they treat them like shit. But this guy doesn't, because he believes that slaves are more valuable if they're not broken. So he doesn't beat them, he's more efficient like that. And because of that, he's one of the good ones. And again, I know narratively what this character is meant to serve. He's the seedy underworld connection that Naofumi can conveniently tap into. But it's just a really weird implication by the anime, because at no point does this bald git ever get punished for being an unrepentant trader in slaves. And don't get it mistaken, there is nothing wrong if you enjoy this anime. Yeah, the slavery part is super not developed, and it does start to sour the show if you start to even remotely think about it. But at the same time, I'm confident the author behind Shield Hero probably meant well and just wasn't equipped to handle the long, winding moral implications of having an MC literally indulge in slavery. I just don't think the creator of Shield Hero really thought out the whole implication all the way through. But what if I told you that's actually par for the course in Japan? They don't celebrate slavery by any means, but they don't see it in the same way the West does. That to the Japanese, slavery isn't that big of an issue. And the thing is, I can actually relate to that. And to explain that take, I'm gonna have to talk about my own country for a bit. I'm your slave, and I cannot get by. Now, you might say, Muxedo, on what authority do you have to talk about slavery and its effects on people? You're just some Southeast Asian git. Well, I'll have you know that this Southeast Asian git was born in Starkville, Mississippi, a state that ranks 34th in education, and a town that once had a KKK rally. My curse in knowing this is now yours. But jokes aside, there is actually a reason why Japan uses the slavery trope a lot more than just wanting the main character to farm aura by liberating a slave girl. And that's the fact that the average Japanese person probably doesn't know a lot about slavery. And before you think that I'm making a sweeping generalization about a foreign culture, here's the thing, I can actually relate to that. Because here in Malaysia, we also had a small history of slavery. When the British came to colonize the Malay Peninsula, one of the many things they took away from the local Malay kings and nobility was the right to own slaves, specifically orang asli slaves, the aboriginal people of the Malay Peninsula. And this fact isn't mentioned anywhere in our textbooks. In fact, it's actively hidden, with the only mention of it being that the British came over and took away our cultural privileges. That is quite literally the exact wording used in the history textbooks when I was still in high school. So the average Malaysian has no idea that our small country had a brush with slavery. If you were to ask the average Malaysian on the street about this, no one would even know what the heck you're talking about. That's how suppressed this knowledge is. Same with the Japanese. Unlike Malaysia, where we have one standardized textbook for the entire country, Japan doesn't. Instead, each school has the freedom to choose their own textbook from whatever publisher they like. And because there's no standardization, some publishers omit fully the atrocities of slave labor by Japan in World War II, others do mention it in varying amounts. Does that make it right for the average person not to know these things? I'm not touching that can of worms. But I am trying to show you guys that, yeah, sometimes it's not willful ignorance. Depending on the system, some things are just well suppressed that even time and history is forgotten. Speaking for Malaysia at least, do I personally think that people should know that my ancestors practiced slavery upon a people group who, in modern-day Malaysia, are still underrepresented. Yeah, I do. But like I said, this shit is just not taught anywhere. It's hard to be angry at people for not knowing when the system is set up in a way for people not to know. That said though, I do acknowledge that unintentional ignorance still isn't an excuse to not know these things. Everyone has equal access to a library. In the wise words of the 21st century philosopher Arthur, having fun isn't hard when you have a library card. But school is also the place where many of us get our first impressions of the world. While I'm confident that the average Japanese school kid is taught a reasonable amount regarding the horrors and damages of Imperial Japan and the slave labor they forced upon the peoples of Asia, I wouldn't be surprised if there were gaps in that knowledge. And I say that because of the gaps in my own knowledge about my own country's history. The collective knowledge that you're exposed to as a kid definitely isn't as simple as we thought it was. Japan isn't celebrating slavery by making it a common trope. It's just that when you mix the desire for a power fantasy where the hero has to liberate a camp of enslaved big-titted cat girls with the politics of literally not knowing any better, you get stories where the ramifications of slavery aren't really much of a concern. They got the big-titted cat girl slave, alright? End episode. It's not like Western media where the effects of slavery and colonization are still in the public mind that when a story does have these tropes, there's a huge responsibility to portray and solve them as authentically as possible. At the end of the day, slavery as a topic is just talked about differently by different cultures. And to a certain degree, you can't really blame them for that. There's also just the fact that different cultures prioritize talking about different cultural traumas. Yeah, Japan plays fast and loose talking about slavery, but because of their terrible work culture and the country's hyper-collectivism that's actively killing their birth rates, it's a huge reason why in a lot of isekais, they're all about escaping the rat race and being able to stand out from the faceless many. Modern African Americans even, whose ancestors were denied freedoms and representation because of the long-lasting effects of American chattel slavery and racism, make stories on how they can stand proud in spaces long denied to them. And Eastern Europeans make stories about how much it sucks to live in Eastern Europe. Tolstoy, my guy, what do you have to say? It can't be that serious. And there are plenty of other examples of cultures making stories relatable to them that I know I'm not mentioning, but I do hope that it gives you an idea of how one event can be seen by different cultures. All I can say is that people are complicated, and the collective knowledge that you're exposed to, depending on your place of birth, is also complicated. But because slavery is so prevalent in anime, manga, and light novels, what does that say of the people that consume it?
I'm begging you, make me your slave. I volunteer to be the Shield Hero's slave.
So just to be clear, I am not trying to make this video just bashing on isekais. What, you think I didn't do that already? I'm a shit YouTuber. I've already farmed that outrage. But I am making this video to explore how media doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's influenced by a lot of outside forces like culture and popular opinion. And same goes with the people that watch it. For example, there's a researcher by the name of Stuart Hall who theorized something called the reception theory. Fun fact, I actually had to learn about Stuart Hall because I have a bachelor's degree in communications. Yes, I was an underachieving kid in school. How could you tell? But in Stuart Hall's reception theory, he says that authors and storytellers encode in the narratives they make the ideologies and thoughts they're trying to get across. And we as the audience have the freedom to accept or reject these messages based on our own cultural and political backgrounds. And I think this plays a huge part in why slavery continues as a trope in fantasy anime. It's no longer slavery. It's anything and everything but. Slave girls aren't girls who've been put into the terrifying idea of outside bodily control. They're potential love interests for the MC to liberate and to adore him. Beast folks that have been liberated and later choose to return to work for the main character isn't because of the lack of initiatives or systems to reintegrate marginalized groups of people. It's because of how gosh darn great the main character is. Fictional anime slavery is a template. Messages and ideas that the audience can easily read into. In the manga and light novel scene in Japan, these templates are a dime a dozen thing. A quick and easy way to get the story going, and for the audience to immediately familiarize them with the characters. But don't take my word for it. As Japanese novelist and cultural critic Hiroki Azuma says in his book, Otaku the Database Animal, he says, quote, "There used to be a narrative behind a work, but as the importance of narrative has declined, the characters have become more important in otaku culture. Subsequently, a database for moe elements that generates these characters have been established. The attractiveness of characters is more important than the degree of perfection of individual works." Which is another long-ass way to say that slavery is purely meant to facilitate aura farming and waifu shenanigans. Solving slavery doesn't matter when you can get a waifu from a slave. Now, I'm not saying that fantasy anime devalues the severity of IRL slavery. That is a take. But when millions of people have consumed this trope over 10 plus years, is it still the same thing by the end of it? I would like to think that the average Japanese fantasy author doesn't sit down to intentionally write a story about how you can get a hot anime GF through slavery, some of them at least. But we're at a point where slavery in anime, manga, and light novels literally means anything other than the violent and institutionalized revocation of an individual's rights. And because of that, it feels hollow sometimes. It's just so funny that in a genre that's all about escaping the terrible work-life culture of Japan, they often never go beyond that. Which is unfortunate because it sounds like a fun deconstruction of the genre. Show the parallels on how fantasy slavery and Japan's hyper-capitalism-born modern work-life culture are one of the same thing. How oppression and repression can become institutions unto themselves. And again, I know there are stories where characters do deal with slavery in different capacities. But outside a select few of these stories, it's hard to get invested when you know this is as far as some of them go. But in defense of this trope, you have to be dragging your knuckles pretty fucking hard if you knowingly go into an isekai or a power fantasy anime and aren't expecting these same encoded messages. This genre was made for people who love the one thing about it and will keep ordering the one thing about it. Now, I acknowledge that I have fully grown out of my power fantasy days and that the novel experiences I seek are just not in the genre anymore. I also acknowledge that not everything needs to be super deep and insightful. I too enjoy my daily consumption of the content slop, but I just think that there's something to be said, not just at what fantasy worlds authors and creators can imagine, but also at what they never question.